A warm welcome to today's webinar focusing on formulating research questions, some basics, techniques, and practical examples. We hope that as a general learning outcome, you will, after this webinar, have developed a better understanding on how to frame research questions. Let's move further. So the specific learning outcome for today is to understand what the question is about, to know about selection criteria for questions, to get an insight into the development and evolution of the research questions, to know what to do with answered questions and why it can be hard to craft research questions, to learn how research question framing can be actually a very structured process, and to look in the closing at some examples, and to move then into a group activity which will be moderated by Jack. So what is the question? And actually, what is the question is indeed a real question. And as we will see, it is really difficult to come up with research questions. Now, where do they come from? Do they pop out the blue? Or how do we get to a research question? Now, when the question's gone wrong, I think then we are in very trouble. Then the answer might be something like 42, which is the answer to life, to universe, and everything in accordance to Adam Douglas. Now, research questions emerge from a purpose. What do we really want to look into? What are we about to explore? And I think it is not that much about our creativity here, but rather about the circumstances and the context of what we are dealing with. If you look at this image, then you will see that you could have three very different research avenues dependent on what you want to explore. If you want to know the essence of hoarseness, then possible questions would be, what is the essence of hoarseness? Where is there information about hoarseness? And what is hoarseness in the first place? Likewise, if you want to look at inner proximity, then questions might be, where is my inner proximity? What is my inner proximity? Or why do I feel like I would need to find my inner proximity? So the research question is very much derived from the research context. There's a close relation both with regards to the words, the very words that you are using, but also with regards to the context of the observation. Now, what then are the selection criteria for research questions? That will depend very much what do we want to know and what is the purpose of the research. Here you will see on the left side the question frames that start with the typical W questions: who, what, when, where, why, but also how, can, will, do, which. And depending on the research focus, the one or the other questions are qualifying more or less. The why question is, for example, a very typical and traditional question for qualitative research. And once you look into reasons, causality, or purpose, while there are other questions like can, will, do, which are very much inherent to quantitative research. Now, what are we looking at? Let us take this example, which is provided in a handbook and which looks at the case. The faculty listed their research interest, considered in particular shared interest and departmental achievements to create a list with 5 domains matrixed against 3 research foci. And you will see on the left side the domains, which are listing users, context, language and media of communication, interactive systems, strategic designs, and design systems. So depending on the type of domain in which we attempt to carry out research, depending on that, the theory will change. If we pick up, for example, users and context, then we could do research against different backgrounds, like, for example, the user dimensions, the cognitive context, the social context, the cultural context, the model of prototype used. So depending on what we would want to look into, the methods will vary. And you see, as we are going to work that out, as more information will become available and as more clear it will be which type of research we could be carrying out. And let me again mute everyone. Now, So far, so good. But what is often confusing to students, and not only to students, is what is it that we talk here about we and me? What is the role of that anyway? The faculty listed their research interest, shared interest, departmental achievements. So why is there a we in the equation? Who is defining the question? Is it the researcher really, or is it the literature? Or is it the research problem? Or perhaps the knowledge gap around the research problem? Let's look into this a bit further. First attempts at formulating the research question are often too expensive and vague at the same time, too pontifical and self-conscious, or even too ideological and politically correct. The framing of the research question is iterative and is viewed as a necessary step towards clarity of purpose. This is the dimension of linguistic difference. For example, the research question might challenge existing research or theory, ask an as yet unanswered question, provide information with which to extend or build a tool, or generate an improved method. Each of the examples carry with it a presumed context, a specific research or theory to challenge a domain of knowledge with a question pending knowledge of a specific kind of tool or method, respectively. Now, perhaps this type of information at the end of the day is raising more questions than it is providing us with guidance. Contrary to that, if we look at the right-hand side, we see something very concrete, something that we can relate to. And seeing this situation, there are some quite obvious research questions. Why did the car crash? How did the crash happen? What was the driver doing once the crash happened? What does the computer log file tell us about the moment the car crash happened? And have there been similar crashes in the past? Now you see, all of those are very concrete questions that are not coming in the abstract, but they are very much related to the research field. And they are very much derived directly from the research context. And depending on what we want to look at, depending on that, it is clear which avenue are we wanting to go down. Do we already know and very well have understood why did the car crash? If that is the case, then perhaps we want to focus on the computer log file and what it tells about the moment of crash. Or we want to focus on similar crashes that there have been in the past to compare this crash with other crashes. So working over the concrete, which in this case is a research problem, a car crash, can guide us very much in our research. So if you keep the focus on the problem, then the research questions will emerge naturally, and you don't need to put too much creativity and ideas into this step. It's something natural, it's something that can be derived, and it's nothing where really creativity and ideation needs to go on. Yeah? So this is something that might be guiding us. So then, how do research questions develop and evolve over time? Well, the point is that the research questions are among the last things to be written up in your thesis. At the same time, they are also amongst the first things from which your research starts. Why did the car crash? What has been happening here? And they are subject to a constant refinement as the research progresses. And this is because as the research progresses, the knowledge is building up. Data is becoming available. And with this data, our questions do change. From the initial questioning on what is happening here, why is this not working, or why is A happening once I do B, towards the questions that the research answered, that the data has been pointing to, and you will understand how do questions relate to each other or not, and are there overarching themes and patterns that could be derived. So this is a gradual process as we go along. And with this, yes, please, is there a question?
Sorry. Yes, in the chat section, and whilst you're on this particular page, the question was, should research questions be forward-looking or forward versus backward-looking?
That is a good question. What would be a forward-looking research question? Could you provide me with an example? The point here is if we look forward with an anticipated outcome, then research questions very quickly could be biased by our outcome expectations, which is obviously nothing that we would want it to be. We want the questions to be unbiased as much as possible. So in this sense, forward-looking, not with regards to anticipated outcomes. If it's with regards on how we consider the research to develop, there might be always some anticipation. Now, having said that, if we take, for example, forecast studies, once we do forecast studies, what we do is most of the time we look backward. We look for how the situation, the same situation was emerging over time, evolving, developing over time, as much as what are the related fields and how have they developed in the past. So the understandings that we gain about those fields from the past is what makes us helping doing predictions for the future. So therefore, using the word foresight is perhaps a tricky word, and we will come to false friends in the later part of the webinar, because there are many, many of those false friends that we need to watch out. Is this answer helping a bit?
Yep, thank you very much.
Very well. All right. And then there's the thing, is it the question or is it the answer? Often research is, and perhaps this links a bit to foresight, research is emergent. So we have initial questions and we collect data, and the data is telling us something, but perhaps the data is not telling us what we asked initially. So then we need to do some sort of reverse engineering and try to find out what is the data telling us. What are the questions that can be answered from the data and from the information we collected? And what is it that still remains unknown? So this is something unique, I would argue, to the research process, and which makes a research project very much different from any management project or from any other development project, where you have a clear outcome expectation and work towards meeting those expectations. So let's say you want to create a cancer cure, you know this is the outcome you want to create. But you don't do research on that, because if it's easy to develop the cancer cure, you just develop it right away, right? There's nothing preventing you. If something is preventing you, then this is your research problem that you're looking at. And this small, tiny research problem needs to be overcome, so for you to create the cure. So you focus only on the subpart, which is the understood, not understood research problem, and try to solve that. And using the word solve is again a false friend, which should be used wisely and carefully. Now, let us look into an example how questions evolve over time. So this is an example for a very initial question: what factors affect consumer choice between disposables and durables? It is nothing wrong to start out with a simple questions like that, but it is rather something natural. So as you go along and your knowledge emerges, so the question becomes more precise towards something like what personal values affect consumer purchase between products of diverse lifespans, for example, single use through permanent use. This is already fairly precise. So there are many names in where it is unclear how they are related, many words. Now, as we go further, we can specify and work out this preciseness much more. And this would look at one point like, how do expressed attitudes and environmental responsibility correspond to actual behavior regarding the purchase of single-use through permanent use products? Now, this is a type of question that you might be only able to bring out, or to work out towards the very end of your research. So you had an initial question and you answered it, and then it develops. Now, what to do with answered questions? This came a bit out of a surprise for me, I have to confess, that students apparently, once they understood that research is focused on the research problem, and as they deepen their research, as they advance and create further knowledge, what is understood is clear and sort of solved. So now comes the next. What is still unclear? So you go more and more into depth, and with each steps into depth, you go in width again. So this is a constant move in between depth and width, but you create all of that knowledge, right? And all of this knowledge, to some part or the other, will be a part of your research. Now, to which extent it will be written up in your thesis is something you need to decide. But it came out of a surprise to me that students started taking out the stuff that was understood, and it was off the thesis. Obviously, if you continue that lane, there will never be a substantial body that you could put into your thesis, right? So make clear you understand what your research is about and what of the understood and no longer a problem sort of information should be within your thesis, and what perhaps was rather an initial context piece of information that was useful for you, but doesn't deserve the merit to be part of your thesis. I think this is also something important to be understood, that 90% of what you're doing perhaps will not make it into your thesis, but it was rather of use for you and your personal development. So pick exactly the type of information that you think should be in the thesis and that should not be, if that makes any sense.
Can I ask 2 questions that are in the chat section?
Yes, please.
Right, the first one is, do I need to go for primary sources or secondary sources, or either or one even? Sorry. Do I need to go to primary sources or secondary sources, or a combination of both?
Now, there are 2 sides of answers to this question. The one side is, what would be a typical expectation for undertaking a doctorate, and what is expected in there? So then the answer would be likely you would collect primary data for most of the cases. Now, the other is, do I need? With regards to, do I need? Is there a need? I mean, whatever you can study and understand based upon secondary data, those data is available to you, right? And so it should be used. What then is not available to you is where you need to collect data because of the very need of getting more information. So this information won't fly to you. Now, if you do research outside of a lab environment, then you collect data, I would argue, all of the time. You will talk with people, you will observe things. This is primary data collection as we would consider it. It's perhaps not in a structured way, but still you collect data. The question then becomes, at which point in time do you need to collect primary data in a structured way so that it also will be described in your methodology chapter? So this is for you to be worked out. And perhaps this is also a sort of situation that comes in hindsight. Like, okay, I collected data already all of the time because I each day read my email, I each day chat with colleagues, I keep track of what I'm doing. So now today comes the day I formalize what I have been doing and write that down in terms of methodology. How you do this, I think you need to figure that out yourself. If you go buy the book, you do it upfront and then carry out the research as planned. However, I earlier talked about there's a difference in between doing a project and doing research. If you do research, research is emergent and only can plan up to a certain point. So yes, there must be some structure at the start point, and yes, there will be a considerable change, and also that is normal. If that is answering the question.
Yes, the comment was, that sounds good. There was another question asking, how precise should one be in extremely fluid research such as ethnography?
I think preciseness is always very important because, and notably to qualitative research, as only over this we can allow others to re-experience and reconclude what we have been doing and try to reduce objective and biased sorts of actions as much as possible. Now, having said that, from a supervisor perspective, where the red alarm bells ring is fast development. Now, I think there's no such thing as fast development. Things develop fast, yes, but it depends on the level of depth on how we look at things. And it also depends on exactly how well do we understand our field and how well do we know about the past and related fields. So there comes the element like, okay, no, things are actually not developing that fast, or I'm looking just at the different thing. I think once you think, oh, it's too fast, ask yourself why, and check if you not perhaps look into something wrong, if that makes some sort of sense.
The comment was, I find it difficult to align the research problem, objective, research questions, and research design. Do you have any tips?
Yes, and I think you might have read the past webinar, because this is actually something that we will now come to, exactly the triple of research problem, research objective, and research question. There's something inherent into this triple that is just asking for friction, and we will look into this. Now, the question and the questioning might be faulty. Perhaps the most widely known example of that failure occurs when scientists mistake correlations for causation, or, as Li Kempeng described it, inferential questions for causal ones. Inferential questions ask whether two variables are somehow related, while causal questions ask if deliberately changing one actual affects the other. As an example, some researchers report a connection between mobile phones and brain cancer, but those studies simply asked cancer patients and healthy people about their past cell phone use. Sure, it's possible that cell phones cause brain cancer, but maybe a cancer diagnosis leads people to report spending more time on their portable phones than they actually did. Now, research is something where the risk of faulty question is really inherent, and so we need to be consciously aware of that. And a simpler example in the strange correlation between sports and elections put forward in the same guide is one rule of thumb: if the Washington football team wins their last home game of the season, the incumbent party stays in the White House. That rule has predicted 17 of the last 19 presidential elections, but that doesn't mean that their wins or losses influenced who moved into the White House. Maybe it's the other way around, or maybe it's a coincidence. Answering the inferential question, is there a correlation, says nothing about the causal questions. So the question is perhaps simply wrong. And confusion between data analytic question types is central to the ongoing replication crisis. Misconstrued press release describing scientific results and the controversial claim that most published researchers' findings are false. The solution is to ensure that data analytic education is a key component of research training. The most important step in the direction is to know the question. What is the question? Mistaking the type of question being considered is the most common error in data analysis. Now, and this holds valid from both a very theoretical side. So if you work over causal, inferential, predictive, inferential, exploratory, descriptive, if you look at it from the theoretical side, you will clearly see which type of questions can be wrong. And you can exactly look into the type of research that you are carrying out. And based upon that, you can actually buy the book, relate the question, derive the question from there, and have a clear understanding. Now, while you do all of this, nothing of that will help you with the triple problem of research problem, research objective, and research questions, and why they are so hard to combine. Nevertheless, it still will provide you with a good starting base on theoretically choose your question. Now, the triple problem, however, emerged from a difference. And this is the problem view versus solution view. Now, let's look into the general research questions guidance on the right side as an example and illustration what I mean here. An excellent way to form general research questions begins with the information gaps the decision maker and researcher identified earlier when discussing the decision problem. Recall that information gaps are simply the difference between what the decision maker currently knows and would like to know about a problem in order to make a decision. For example, in one recent project for this class, the problem that faced the decision maker from Habitat for Humanity's Restore was simply, what must I do to increase my sales to $1 million annually? The Restore's two primary target markets are low-income homeowners and small independent residential landlords. Now, the point here is that most students with whom we work together read this type of guidance not with a problem view, but with a solution view. And doing so gets out a very different message. If I read that example with a solution view, what my eye will call is the question, what must I do to increase my sales to $1 million annually? Now, and once that big blue elephant is in the room, it's hard to get it out again. However, if you read the same guidance with a problem view, what you pick is the decision problem at the first, and then the problem that faced the decision maker. So you clearly understand this is about a decision-making problem, and this is how you would read the guide further. So depending on the lens that you adopt and your ability on working over the problem end, that will make exactly the triple problem, research problem, objective, and research questions disappear. And we will look into this further. Now, there's a clear relationship between the research problem, the research question, and the outcome expectation. Now, the point here is that the research problem has a problem focus, while the outcome expectation is a future focused. What do we want to get out here? We want to develop that cancer cure. Great, go ahead, develop it. But I can't. Why can't you? Because I don't know which chemical. Why don't you know that? Because I haven't. Why don't you do that? So, and as more as you go down the why, because, as more you will focus on the problem and you will move away from your outcome expectations. And as you do so, you will derive the research question from the research problem. The tricky thing here is, though, you might not be interested in the research problem. And this very often happens to students. But I do want to create that cancer cure. I do not want to look into this. Yeah, dear student, now we have a problem. What you are interested in is not a problem. Therefore, you can't carry out research in what you're interested in. On the other hand, where you can carry out research, you don't want it. So what do we do here? Answer that to yourself. Do you want to waste the next 4 to 5 years potentially dropping out because what you want to do is not what can be done? Or do you want to discuss that rather now today and get it clear? Because if you quit today, you will save some years, and perhaps it can be brought together nicely. But it's a standard trivial that makes research fail. And I would argue it's one of the strongest reasons why students drop out. So please understand that. Research question framing as a structured process. Now, this is coming into the finals of this webinar. And actually, if we overcome the first barrier, which is overcoming that our outcome expectation might not be that what we can be researching, then if that is understood and clear, it's actually a straightforward walk through the park. Now, is the research question of interest to the researcher and organization? And if not, are we still going to do it? Is it a problem that is urgent? Now, this is something actually where research can go wrong again. If it's too urgent, again, the outcome expectation will come in. I must get that cancer cure. And there you go. Again, any of your actions will be biased by that. If it's not urgent enough, it's perfect, but it might be not interesting. You might not be motivated. So this is something you need to negotiate with yourself. Where in that middle part will I locate my research? Now, then, is a research question researchable? And also within the time frame and resources at hand. Complexity quickly builds up. So starting simple is never a bad idea. What methods have earlier studies applied, and is it feasible to adopt these? Now, this is not about plagiarism. It's not about copy-paste what others did. It's about research. Research builds on the state of the art. State of the art is working over earlier studies. Do I know my earlier studies? If so, they can provide me with all of the ingredients that I need. Methods, questions, you name it. Pitfalls to watch out, there you go. Will the research produce data that can be measured, supported, or contradicted? Now, if you work over earlier studies, you are covered on that end. Is the question actionable? Does it allow to be acted upon? Again, working over earlier studies makes the likelihood great that you will have an actionable question, but please do understand there are questions that are not actionable, so you do not manage to do anything with them. So make sure your question is actionable. Then follow the expectable. The work should be focused, it should be specific, it should be complex, but not too complex. It should be analytical, yes, and not too much process-driven, and it should be unbiased, open-ended without suggesting the solution. So those are expectable things. And I think here's the third one, the complex, don't make it too complex. And the fourth one, analytical, understand that the easy thing is for you to write in the hundreds of pages to produce content by working over non-analytical parts and just describing processes. Today I did, therefore, tomorrow I will do, therefore, I feel, therefore. Yeah, if you work analytical, it might take really a day or two to write a simple page. But as you go ahead, you will develop the ability and the speed will increase. Avoid speculation and work over facts and figures. So just simply answer this question. What is a research question? Do you have an answer to that? Then what is it that is still unknown? If you have no answer to it, there you go with your possible questions. Why is the situation as it is? What is problematic in the situation? And why is this seen to be problematic? And why has no one looked at this situation thus far? And if someone look at it, why does this situation still persist? It rarely will happen that no one looked at something that far. What you will come more often than not across is just your knowledge gap. You just don't know it. Someone else will have looked at it, so try to figure out who was it. And identification of supportive guides. They are guides to follow. They are quite simple, but they are also filled with false friends, which those that wrote them don't put in very likely because they want to harm you, but for them, things make differently sense. They have more experience and they will understand things differently. Choose an interesting general topic. Right, that doesn't mean actually do that. It means specific and focused, not general. However, it should be generally interesting. Yes, there's no point in doing something that's of no interest to anyone, right? So each senior scientist will know about that. A novice scientist thinks, oh, I shall be creative here. No, you shall not. Do some preliminary research on your general topic. Now, Guide 1 in combination with Guide 2 means for the next 12 months you're off reading, and then you will perhaps realize, oh, time wasted. Stay specific and focused. So you don't need to read that much. Find specific related studies, and there you go. You can save years on that. Consider your audience. Keep your audience in mind when narrowing your topic and developing your question. Yes, very well. And not only keep them in mind, engage with them. I know you can't do research prior to ethics clearance. However, if you work outside of a lab environment, you engage with your stakeholders on a daily basis. So engage with them on that too. Start asking questions. Start asking yourself open-ended how and why questions. Perfect tip. Engage the stakeholders and discuss the problem and let questions emerge from there. Don't try to innovate yourself if you don't need to. Less creativity can be more. Evaluate your question. After you've put a question or even a couple of questions down on paper, evaluate these questions to determine whether they would be effective research questions or whether they need more revising and refining. Yes, and also try to involve stakeholders into this evaluation process. So there are many of false friends out there, and they can eat up a lot of time and make your life miserable for many days. And coming back to the timelines that we have shown earlier, if you look at this example, if this is a case study, what is the research question? If this is the answer, what is the question? Is a panel game from a BBC improvised comedy program, mocks a week. From the given answer, panelists rather comically guess the question. In one episode, the panel was given the answer, cheese, wine, and rubbish, to which one panelist answered, what 3 words best describe France? Right, we had said earlier, is it the question or is it the answer? And what is the data telling us? So as more as we try to take data into account, and as much as we try to interpret it, we will be more in the position to design the right question, right? So this is a gradual process. It's a front and back, and it's worthwhile to play with it a bit. Now, let's look in the closing part into some example research questions. And I figured a number of 4 examples would do it. If there is a need for further, we can afterwards look into concrete examples if you want to take some forward. Now, research question 1. What is the evidence for claims made about listening behavior, listening processes, and listening barriers in the popular technical and academic literatures? Now, is that a good research question? Well, it actually is only asking for collecting data, and it is not clear what the data is needed for. So what is the purpose of collecting the data? Let's look into another example. What should series of listening look like? What sorts of terms ought they contain? And what are specific components of good listening theory? Now, it asks you for speculation about a solution. And it is not clear to what problem it would be a solution. And what is the meaning of good anyway? So perhaps not so good example. Let's look into another. What theories exist to explain listening, broadly speaking, and how well do they stand to empirical scrutiny? All right, let's look into this. So actually, this consists of 2 questions, and it is not clear how these relate to each other. While in the context of the paper, the question might or might not make sense, as a standalone question, they might provide the wrong guidance to a novice researcher. And again, what is the meaning of well anyway, right? Is it well? Is it good? Is it good enough? What are doing all of those relative undefined words in here? And the 4th and final example. It's a research statement that goes, our proposed project seeks to overcome this barrier by addressing the following actionable research question: how can existing data and insights into the policy process be leveraged to inform decision-making on where and how to intervene to effectively shift multiple access of food systems toward enhancing the sustainability of diets? It's taken from a university website, so one would assume this is good and sound, right? Let's look into that. Now, it's not clear from the research statement how the interrelations would be considered in the research, how they belong or not together, or what is the definition of effectively and what are multiple access. As a novice, keep it clear and simple. And what is effectively anyway? So again, relative words. Now, the point here is many of those research statements you will find at university websites, and you will lean on them and try to be guided. And those statements do make sense, but they will be perhaps targeted at different audiences. This is an expectable research statement for funded research. But this is pitched to the funding agency, not to a research student. So, and then it does make sense because it ticks all of the boxes it needs to tick, so to be appealing to the funding agency. However, it is really not good from a research perspective, right? Know your false friends and know the purpose of why things and information is made available. With this, if you want to train a bit further on how to frame research questions, you might want to check out our advanced training course on issue identification, problematizing, and research question framing. I would argue that independently on where you are in your research, this training ground can prove useful, even for those at the very end, or for those just preparing to study. And with this, we will move into the group activity.
We do have one question up front.
Yes.
The question is, do I need to take both quantitative and qualitative data to abreast with available tools?
Right. Let me answer that perhaps differently to not enter here on a political field. If you work over related studies, this question likely will be answered without you needing to bother with it. You will see what did related research find out. Did they make use of quantitative or qualitative research? What was the research producing, and what is still unknown? From those, what is still unknown, how has that unknown been researched in related studies? You see, and I could work with you like that for the next 2 weeks until we are pretty much at the end of your research. And I would not need to be a single time creative or take a own stand on that. And the reason is I work over related studies. Now, I might want to take a stand because I put in my belief. Now, if we talk about belief, we talk about religion and not about science. And obviously, you need to be a believer to some degree. But I would argue as more belief and innovativeness you put into your work, as more you make yourself an enemy and as more political your research becomes. Now, if you work over related studies, then from the very start of your research up to the examination, you can something to play the ball. There is something to whom you can play the ball further, which is called related research. The related research will have been evaluated by others, and there will be much known about that related research, right? If you work over your creativity and over your belief, so be it, be welcome. But the likelihood of your research taking much more long than the research of your pal who works over related studies is greatly enhanced. So please also do understand that.
The add-on to that particular question was, is there any specific words or tools to analyze both the data, the qualitative and quantitative?
Well, and the answer to that would be, again, related studies. You see, this is a sort like a universal remedy that you can apply to much of your research. And once you understood that, you will just continue leaning to related studies and working over related studies because it just becomes natural. And this is how science works, right? You work over the state of the art. You know, the cancer cure example, you need a cancer cure, go ahead, build it. But I can't build it. Why? Because I don't know. Aha. Why does no one know about it? Related studies. There we go. So I think this is very much something you should get deeply ingrained and make part of your daily way of work, if that makes any sense.
Right, thank you.
Good.
Okay,
then let me play the ball to Jack.
Yes, okay. There was an inquiry as to whether a copy of the PowerPoint slides and recording, yes, they'll be available at the website, the DoctorateHub website in the next 2 or 3 days.
Yes, exactly. So let me stop the recording and let's open the